In the last video, we went through all the nitty-gritty of getting the frames milled out and steam bent into place. And in this video, we're going to talk about what we need to do to get them finally wrapped up and permanently screwed and fastened into their homes in the keel timber. After we steam bent all the frames, we left them clamped in place for a couple days so that they could be totally cool and dry and make sure that they were well adjusted to their new home and their new shape. And once that was done, we've slowly been going through and cleaning up the frame sockets, doing any final little tweaks there, taking the frames out, giving them a quick sand, shellacking any of the fang surfaces where two wooden pieces meet up, and then giving the rest of the frame a coat of Danish teak sealer. And once we have all the frames done and all the frame sockets cleaned out and everything's varnished and oiled and painted and ready for assembly, we'll go through in one shot and bed and screw them all in. When we're done with that, all the midship frames will be done, and then we can jump up to the stem and the stern and get those wrapped up, hopefully before the new year. So looking between stations 5 and 6 here, we have one frame and one frame socket that are completely done. So the frame socket's been cleaned up, the frame's been oiled and shellacked, and the frame socket's been shellacked and then painted with anti-fouling paint, and the heel of the frame has been painted with anti-fouling paint. And then if we go forward a little bit, the frame socket's all done, but we haven't taken the frame out and oiled and varnished that yet. And its mate on the other side is in the same condition. And then this frame and this frame socket, they haven't been touched at all. So we still need to clean up the frame socket a little bit and let the frame in some and take the frame out and give it the oil and the varnish and get the heel of it painted. So you can see in the back here that there's a frame doesn't quite meet against the back of the keel timber. And that's from when we bent the frames in. We obviously didn't have the angle of the back rabbet totally perfect there. So what we've been doing is going in and taking these frames out and just carving that socket in a little bit deeper on that bottom edge and just cleaning them up so that this frame will slide back and close up this gap. And then once those are all done, we'll go down the back rabbet with the adze and clean that up a little bit and bring it back to it until it hits the frames. So back outside the boat here, between stations 6 and 7, we have one of the frame sockets that's already been all cleaned up and adjusted. And we have one here that we haven't. So we've got a little bit of gap here in the back. And if you look, this is our back rabbet here. The frame overhangs the back rabbet by a little bit. Not by a lot, but by a little bit. So all we've been doing is popping this frame out and bringing that socket, just angling it back a little bit more. And we close up this gap in the back a bit, and we bring the frame flush, if not just a little bit in past the current bearding line here, or the back rabbet. And then once all the frames are in and that's all done, we'll go through and just clean up this back rabbet a little bit and bring it down to the depth of the frames. So I'm just gonna mark where this frame is currently sitting. And this is because we don't want the frame to go any deeper in the socket. We just want it to move inboard a little bit. So this will give us some reference lines so that we know where everything is hitting now. And I want it still to be at the same line at the top, just in a little bit. So Alex, if you can jump up the top there, we'll pop this out, and then I'll do a little bit of carving and we'll put it back in, and we'll do a little bit of test fitting until it's a nice snug fit and we're flush here on the front, and we close up this gap in the back. And then that frame socket will be ready to be shellacked and painted, and the frame will be ready to go get sanded and oiled and shellacked. I guess I'll open up the top of that socket a little bit while I'm at it. Whew. That was harder than any of them have been. Yeah, I think that's pretty good. I'm gonna drop the frame in and see how that looks. Cool. Oh, I should drop quite a bit. Cool. Alright. So this is all cleaned up, and then we let the frame back a little bit, so we're tight in the back here. Everything looks good. Once all these frames are permanently fastened in, we'll come in and we'll clean up the back rabbet a little bit here. And if down here along the bottom, if we don't get the frames 100% perfect, it's not the end of the world. The kerf doesn't start till up here. And honestly, these frames are pretty oversized for a boat this size anyways. So if we end up dubbing just a tiny little bit off the bottom of those frames to get everything to finish up smooth and fair when we put on the planking, it's really not a big deal. We could probably take off a 1/4 inch or more and be good, although I don't think we'll have to take anywhere near that. But we do have a little bit of wiggle room when that time comes. So now that this is all set, we can pop it out and put the coats of shellac and anti-fouling paint in the frame socket, and this frame can go upstairs and get sanded and oiled. You ready? Oh, it comes up much easier now. Stay. Okay. We're applying shellac to the fang surfaces inside the frame socket here, and that's so that when we put in the bedding compound, when we permanently attach the frames, the wood doesn't suck out all of the moisture and oils out of the bedding compound. And if the bedding compound loses those oils and that moisture, the bedding compound won't do its job. So paint in itself will help with that, but the shellac is a much better agent for sealing that wood, and the paint will have no problem sticking to the shellac. So you'll see us use it time and time again, and it's any time that we're going to put in bedding compound and there's going to be fang surfaces there, they'll get a coat of shellac. Alright, that's it. And we wait 20 minutes and put on another coat. Now that the frame's up here, we can give it a light sand and put on some shellac. So we're going to shellac the very heel of it where it's going to go into the frame socket, and that's so that the frame doesn't absorb all the oils out of the bedding compound and that seals the wood. We're also going to shellac this outside face here that goes against the planking, and the reason for that is before the planks go on, we're going to paint it, and the paint will adhere really well to the shellac, and the shellac will seal it up really well for now. The reason we're not painting it with the anti-fouling straight out of the gates is that we might end up doing a little shaping, a little dubbing, maybe even we'll have to re-steam some sections a little bit if they didn't quite bend fair. And when we do that, the anti-fouling paint, since it's all copper based, is going to be a bit of a mess. Where the shellac, we can just sand it off, there's no real worries, and whatever we don't end up messing with, we can just paint the anti-fouling paint right over the shellac and it won't cause any problems. So we'll sand this outer face, give that a coat of shellac, we'll do the same thing to the heel, and then once the shellac is dry, we'll give it another quick sand on the other faces and some Danish teak sealer, and it'll be just about ready for assembly. Good for me to make some noise? dokie. Now that our frame socket here has got 2 coats of shellac, we are going to paint it with some Petit Unipoxy, which is a hard anti-fouling paint. So it's copper-based, so the critters are not going to want to eat it, live on it, coexist with it. And it's a hard paint, so it's not made to wash away, which is what a lot of hull paints are designed to do. So this should stay on there for a long time. Some builders use red lead primer in this, but we're trying to use the lead kind of as little as we can. We know we did it for the ballast keel, but if we can avoid lead in the paint, we will. And to our research and understanding, the hard anti-fouling paint will do just as good of a job. I also want to talk real quick about this check that you can see here, because I know some of you are going to see that and you're going to ask about it. These kind of checks are really no big deal. It doesn't go in very far, and it'll be completely covered up by the plank. There'll be bedding compound put back there. And once this keel timber's in the water for a while and fully swells up, this size check will completely shut itself. It'll swell totally shut. So worst case scenario, if they're a little bit bigger than this, we'll put some dolphinite, some bedding compound in there. And then when the timber swells shut, it'll just kind of squeeze that dolphinite, that bedding compound, out of there. But this one's so small, we're not even going to worry about it. So don't fret, it will be completely fine. I'll give this a good shake. So we put the anti-fouling paint into these glass jars, and we know storing paint in the glass jars is not ideal. We're very careful with them, but it makes it a lot easier. We can just shake up half a gallon at a time, and the lids come on and off, and the glass cleans out really well after we've been using the paint for it. So all we're going to do is glob some anti-fouling paint in there, and we are not going to be pretty about this. It's pretty hard to be pretty with a brush that looks like this. Cool. Now we'll just let that dry, and before we put on the frames, we'll do one more coat. Everything that's red so far in the boat for the frame sockets just has one coat, and we'll do one final coat on them all at the end. And now that we've killed a little time doing this, the frame upstairs, the coats of shellac are dry on that, so we can grab the sander and give the rest of the frame a little bit of a sand and sand off any of the shellac that got places we don't want the shellac, and that frame will be ready for the Danish teak sealer. The fang surfaces now have their 2 coats of shellac, and remember, fang surface is any place where we have one piece of wood butting up against another. So those all got 2 coats of shellac. Now we're going to do a little more sanding and give them their final coats of Danish teak sealer. And the reason we didn't sand the whole things earlier is because you can see some spots here, the varnish, or the shellac rather, has flowed off to the sides, and we don't want it there. So by waiting to sand those sides, we can sand off any of that shellac that got where we don't want it, give it a couple coats of teak sealer, and they can go back in the boat and be ready for their final assembly. Now that the frames have their last sand and we got rid of any of that shellac that ran off onto the sides, we're going to give them 2 coats of this Danish teak sealer here, which is what we're using on all of the framing and backbone material that is inside of the boat. It's going to eventually all be covered up and we'll never see it really, but the Danish teak sealer should help keep that wood from rotting and any creepy crawlies chewing on it and that kind of thing, and it makes it look real pretty right now. So we're gonna give those a couple wipes and then they'll be ready to go back into the boat. So since we're not really worried about getting an amazing finish out of this teak sealer, we're just rubbing it on with a rag, which so far has worked beautifully. The application is super easy, and one thing I really like about the teak sealer so far is that if we have any checks, especially like in the keel timber or any of the big backbone assemblies, every time we put on a coat of the teak sealer, I've just been flooding those checks. And the teak sealer, as it dries in those checks, it's been making kind of a bit of a putty-like paste, which is just about perfect. It keeps the checks from drying out too much, but if those checks swell shut, it's kind of this soft, goopy stuff in there that just gets pushed back out, which is really awesome. And so far, it's been a great product to work with, and couldn't be happier with how easy it goes on. And there's no sanding in between coats. When we do the second coat, we'll just wipe it right on here. Once the frames are all sealed up, we put them back in the boat, and as you can see, we put them back in kind of the wrong way. We flip them 180 so that the ends stick out and they're easier to paint. So let's go check that out. Cool. Once the frames are all oiled up, we bring them down here and we put them in, and you can see if you were to flip this 180, it would fit nicely against the ribbons. But right now, we have it the other way and lightly clamped so that these heels are kind of sticking out into space. And that helps facilitate painting them. So once we get a few done, clamped in this way, we'll run through and paint the bottoms. So you can see this heel over here is painted. This one is yet to be done. Once they're painted and we're ready to put in the bedding compound, we'll put the bedding compound in there, we'll drop these frames in, and they're gonna get fastened with these big old bronze screws. And we're using the slotted screws. They'll be a little more finicky to put in, but down the road when they're painted over, varnished, corroded, what have you, they'll be a lot easier to take out because you can get in there and you can kind of carve a new slot even if you have to, which you can't really do with any other screw type. So in this case, it's an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure, and we'll thank ourselves down the road for this decision. So that's about it right now for the frames. We're slowly wrapping that up. We should have them bedded here and screwed in. You'll see that soon. We've also been working on the rivet machine, which is really close to being up and running, so we can make all the planking rivets. We have to get that done before we can start planking. And we got a little more work on the stem and stern rabbets to do, and a little bit more steam bending to coming up. And hopefully we'll have all that done by the new year and start hanging planks shortly in 2019, which will be really exciting, so stay tuned. Once we get the final quirks worked out of the rivet machine and start cranking the rivets out, we have everything we need to see us through planking, which should keep us busy right through the winter. And then come late spring, definitely by the summer, we should be working inside our hull, which is going to be amazing. And we're going to have to start putting the systems in, like the water tanks, the fuel tanks, the diesel, and things are going to start to get pretty pricey because we can't go out in the back 40 and cut those down. So with that in mind, we thought it would be a great time to do another little t-shirt campaign and see if we could start to bolster some of those funds and get a little money squirreled away for all those systems.
So we appreciate all the help on our project. We've had a lot of people asking how they could help, and we figured a t-shirt campaign would be a perfect way for us to squirrel away some more money for those big systems. They're going to get pretty expensive. And we've got a little bit more news. Since we decided to go with the gaff design, we have changed our logo. So we're going to update the logo, and the t-shirt will be the first time it'll be shown in public. We've also got Pat Atkin's blessing, thank you Pat, to put the lines drawings on the back of the shirt. So we'll have those on the back with William Atkins' original signature on there. So thank you Pat, that should be a really fun shirt to have. And if you're in the continental US, they should ship in time for the holidays.
Yeah, thank you very much for watching our videos and following our crazy journey, and we'll see you soon.
See you guys soon. Thank you very much.